Okay, now that the Max Holloway fans hate me for no reason, let's do the same thing to Francis Ngannou fans. Francis Ngannou fights Renan Ferreira this weekend at PFL Battle of the Giants. And honestly, I don't think that event's going to do too well in terms of money or interest or anything that you can account with success whatsoever. I don't have the exact words to start this video, so I'm just going to let Dana White take the reign here and use his words to make my point come across.
These guys, this guy just came out recently and said, we're going to spend more money than they did on the Sphere. Well, that sounds fucking brilliant. How many tickets are you going to sell? Yeah, they're not very bright. So if I were them, I would do what, listen, it's all fair. Knock yourself out. They're drowning.
So Dana White just basically starts the video off by saying that they're drowning. Why would they do this? And if you think about it, he has a point here. The Sphere took $20 million to produce, but it garnered a lot of celebrity attention, and it was hyped on for months and months on end. To the point where before we even knew what the card was, we were just presuming it would be an amazing card, like Card of the Year, UFC 300 Part 2, whatever and whatever, right? And instead we got a pretty dogshit card in comparison to what we were expecting. It was an okay card in like just terms of a card just happening on a month where pay-per-view is given. But in terms of what we were expecting, it was kind of dog shit. But even despite that, it still made 1 million pay-per-view buys. And it made back all the money they put in just through the live gate alone. They didn't need to delve into their pay-per-view like shares bag to pay for it. No, just the live attendance was enough to pay off the Sphere. And that's what you do when you're paying for these hugely built cards. You need to like set some money aside. Maybe you keep the pay-per-view money. That's like your profit margin. And then you have the live gate, which you use to pay off what you've produced. Makes perfect sense because then they go hand in hand. Like you spend all this money, you increase the gate sales, you get a lot of sales, and then you still have all this pay-per-view that you made left over because they made over 1 million pay-per-view just through the hype of it alone. PFL, on the other hand, have done one promotional bit that I've seen so far, and that was like a CGI Francis Ngannou and Renan Ferreira looking across each other like as like giant Godzilla type monsters. You know what I mean? That was the big promotion that they did for the PFL event. And I just don't think it's going to be enough to pay for this thing. Like, look at the money that they're... And Dana White says one more thing. How many tickets are they selling? PFL does not run massive arena shows. They run capacity crowds of 2,000 to 3,000 people. Even if the ticket sales were somehow the same as the UFC's front row tickets, they're not making near the money the UFC is making. And the ticket prices of a PFL event is far lower than a UFC event. Which begs the question, where is this money coming from? It's quite obvious. It's the Saudis. The event's happening in Saudi Arabia, I do believe. So yeah, it's a Saudi event. But here's the other thing. Francis Ngannou right now fighting Renan Ferreira is by far in the least big marquee match that he's been a part of in literally years. It's smaller than Stipe, it's smaller than John Jones would have been, it's smaller than Antony Joshua, it's smaller than Tyson Fury, it's even smaller than Cyril Gane in my opinion, and that did about 200,000 pay-per-view buys. Is 200,000 pay-per-view buys really going to make up for the $10 million that they're paying Francis Ngannou here? Let's look at some evidence. Our good friend evidence. Dave Meltzer reported that Tyson Fury vs. Francis Ngannou did a total of 10,000 TV buys. Apparently that number ended up being like 11.5 thousand, but that's nothing. And then the numbers with the ESPN Plus was like 56,000. So in combination, they had about 67,500 pay-per-view buys in America. In America, that is. So maybe you're thinking, oh, well, Tyson Fury, this thing and this other thing, and you know what I mean? Maybe you're thinking all these other things. But then you think about it, right? And all of a sudden, I saw this thing from, where is it? Ariel Helwani was talking about how, well, you can't really look at the US numbers. You gotta look at the UK numbers. That's why Tyson Fury is the big superstar and all that stuff. Which begs the question. So you're telling me that Francis Ngannou is the B side? He's not the main draw. He's the guy you put in with the big draw, like someone with a name of their own, to add intrigue to a fight and then sell that fight. So Francis Ngannou is the B side in this fight that took place and where the main revenue was being generated from the UK. Is Renan Ferreira gonna generate any revenue from the UK? Does anyone give a shit about Renan Ferreira? Does anyone in the UK give a shit about Francis Ngannou? Does anyone in the UK give a shit about the PFL? Be honest with yourself, they don't. So if they're not making money in the US with Tyson Fury, a person who's way bigger in the US, I guarantee you, than Renan Ferreira, who most people don't know exists. And this pay-per-view is not being marketed towards the UK? How much money are they going to make now? Moving on, Eddie Hearn, before the Anthony Joshua fight, he said, apparently, that the fans weren't too familiar with Francis Ngannou yet. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know what a star he was. And apparently the fight, this was before the Anthony Joshua fight, apparently the fight with Anthony Joshua will bring in the boxing fans, the MMA fans, the casual fans. It'll be a huge pot of melting fans. All melding together, in harmony, hand by hand. But then we check the pay-per-view buys for the Anthony Joshua fight. And we're looking at 4.6 thousand American buys. No one cared. Even though Tyson Fury arguably lost to Francis Ngannou, or at worst, Francis Ngannou had a really close, competitive 50-50 fight with him. You know what I mean? Oh, not 50-50, but he dropped Tyson Fury and, he looked like he could have won the fight. Anyway, despite the hype, despite all that generating fans like Anthony Joshua, the most popular heavyweight on the planet, Tyson Fury, the top 2 most popular heavyweights on the planet, coming off that war with Deontay Wilder, his name has almost never been bigger unless he fought Anthony Joshua himself. 4.6 thousand? Half of what Tyson Fury and him did in the US? And Anthony Joshua is again another big star in the UK. And that fight happened in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabian princes put that much money into that event with something that was co-headlined by Anthony Joshua, the A side, once again, by the way. Francis Ngannou was the B side. The MMA fans just don't care. We've seen this too many times. We've seen an MMA fighter go into boxing and get their ass whooped over and over and over again. There's only so much we can take. You know what I mean? Like, there's only so many times we can see an MMA fighter go into a boxing fight and then just pretend like they have a chance of winning. And the boxing fans don't care, because guess what? They know this is a novelty fight, realistically, right? This is like old Tyson Fury comes back to have a fight with Cyril Gane or Tom Aspinall in MMA. It will sell well just because, honestly, just because the UFC will promote it so well. But UFC, for all the shit they get, even though boxing arguably promotes their big fights better, no one is promoting their shows week in, week out, pay-per-view after pay-per-view as the UFC is doing. Every single fight night on the build-up to pay-per-view, we're being reminded that a pay-per-view is coming up. We've got Ariel Helwani on the case, we've got MMA YouTube on the case, we've got the press conferences, we've got Dana White himself, we've got the fighters on their own podcast sometimes hyping up these fights. Francis Ngannou, on the other hand, I saw a video of Francis Ngannou just cycling on on one of those like stationary bikes, and that's like the footage I've seen of him getting prepared for Renan Ferreira. How are they gonna make money? I don't understand. PFL is smaller than boxing and the UFC. Let's get that out of the way. It's an event happening in Saudi Arabia like Anthony Joshua's did. I suppose it is targeted towards the US audience, but I find it really hard to believe that fans are going to give a shit about Francis Ngannou versus Renan Ferreira more than they would against Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua taking on Francis Ngannou. Absurd! Anyway, then I see this other article. I've gone in depth, I've done the research, I'm looking at all the evidence. The PFL did their first pay-per-view in 2022, and they had it for $50. Right? $50 on ESPN. It doesn't really matter what it's for. If you want to watch this fight, you'll watch this fight. Realistically, if you have $50 and you really want to watch this fight, you'll pay $50. It would, in my opinion, even if they had it at $10, it wouldn't change at all. I think the people that aren't going to pay for it just aren't going to pay for it, and the people that will, they will. So I think I'm fine with $50 for the Francis Ngannou freak show. But anyway, apparently everyone was happy with their first pay-per-view. Okay, fair enough. But then they say you've got to start somewhere, and we were happy with the outcomes of the whole show. Ethan was truly happy with the show, so if they're happy, we're happy. That doesn't seem like the most confident, like, we did this number or this number, you know what I mean? And then the plan was apparently to do a quarterly pay-per-view every quarter. So 4 pay-per-views a year, if you do the math. And then for some reason they went 6 monthly, so they did 2 pay-per-views in a year. That isn't screaming pay-per-view happy ESPN willing to pay more money at all to me whatsoever. And that was and those cards were actually affordable. Keep in mind, they weren't. Maybe the entire card combined, you were paying maybe 10. No, not even. Come on, the PFL is not giving $10 million to the entire card. You know what I mean? That's not happening. But Francis Ngannou's getting $10 million, and good on Francis Ngannou for scamming the PFL and making him think he's a bigger star than he is. Let's be honest here. Because in the UFC, he's making what, like $500,000 plus pay-per-view points, so it's like $1 mil, $2 mil. Fair, I think. But he's fleeced the PFL in believing that he's the baddest man on the planet. He's this Iron Mike Tyson type of, like, you know what I mean? Like, he's not. There's a reason John Jones came back and had a fight with Cyril Gane. That pay-per-view did huge numbers. Not because of Cyril Gane, because the story there. John Jones was going to fight for the heavyweight championship after all these years and look to become the world champion. And Francis Ngannou could have been the B-side in that fight as well. Trying to stop that from happening. Would have been a huge fight. But no. We've got Renan Ferreira, no storyline. Again, I'm just saying, if you're an MMA fan, hardcore, you don't care about the storyline. You just want to see a good fight. But even you don't care. Like, if Renan Ferreira, the PFL better pray Francis Ngannou wins. Because if Renan Ferreira by any chance knocks out Francis Ngannou, that's $10 million plus something else down the drain. Speaking of which, let's talk about how much money he's making. $10 million for his PFL debut at the Battle of the Giants. $10 million? You know? Maybe this is how they're gonna pay their roster as much as Dana paid for the entire Sphere. Just overpay Francis Ngannou by $10 million, and then just let the ship sink. Because you've got $10 million of bricks on a ship, and I think it's gonna sink pretty badly. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, if you're a hardcore MMA fan, are you really skipping the UFC? Even the UFC's apex, the worst show on the planet. No hype for any of these. UFC doesn't even promote them. But you know it's the UFC. You know it's a Sunday or a Saturday, depending on what part of the world you're at. And you know fights are about to happen. With this Francis Ngannou, honestly, even if you're someone that wants to watch Ferreira versus Ngannou, do you even know it's happening this weekend? Be honest right now. I looked up Francis Ngannou versus Renan Ferreira. No, I didn't look it up. I went on my betting site. I checked the MMA fights coming up. And apparently, the same day as the UFC, Ngannou was fighting Ferreira. I'll be watching the UFC, by the way. If anyone's wondering where I'll side on this competitive battle. This seesaw that's tipping in either direction. UFC or PFL. I'll probably watch the UFC even if it's an Apex card. And that's just Francis Ngannou. This brings me to my next point. Francis Ngannou is taking $10 million off the PFL. What is this model they're going with? I don't understand. Like, any revenue they could possibly generate, just give it all to Francis Ngannou, it feels like. Renan Ferreira. Francis Ngannou has fleeced the PFL so badly. Terrible stuff. I mean, good for Ngannou, but terrible stuff for the PFL. Let's be honest here. For some reason, he wants his opponent, no matter what, to make $2 million, more money than they've ever made before. Renan Ferreira won the PFL tournament, the $1 million tournament that gets them $1 million. Believe it or not, if you win it, you get $1 million. He went through 3 or 4 fights, I believe. He got purses for each individual fight, obviously. But his reward at the end of this silver lining was a fight with Ngannou and $1 million, which is fair to me. $1 million is a lot of money. After taxes, it's probably like 650,000, 666,000, 700,000, something along those lines. You know, 30%, 35%, 40%. He made a lot of money. Francis Ngannou wants him to double that. So what the PFL got out of Renan Ferreira in like 3 or 4 fights, 3 fights maybe, I think it might be actually. They want him to get that with just 1 fight against Francis Ngannou. And for all we know, he's been paid backstage to take a dive. Because if by any chance, what doesn't the PFL get? This is basically $10 million on Francis Ngannou. Put your chips in the middle of the table. The payout isn't even that much, by the way. Like, if Francis Ngannou wins, good job. You don't have anybody else to fight him. What? You're gonna make Ryan Bader fight him next? Ryan Bader, old Ryan Bader, washed Ryan Bader. No one cares, Ryan Bader. Just snuck that in. It's so stupid to me. And you know what is even worse than any of this? Just the main event, that's $12 million that they've put into this. The main event alone. You know who else is on the card? Chris Cyborg in the co-main event. Apparently, reportedly making close to $1 million. You know who else on the card? AJ McKee. He's a big star, right? He's opening the card. What's he making? He's got to be making at least like mid six figures if Cyborg's making like almost $1 million or $1 million potentially. What? Johnny Eblim in the feature fight. How much is he making? A few $100,000 himself? What are you taking home here, PFL? The ticket revenue, are the Saudi princes paying for the show that they're paying for? But are the Saudi princes really paying for the tickets to a show that they're already paying for? Is that what's happening? Like, they've gone out of their way and purchased $50,000 tickets for a show that they've basically paid for themselves. Let's be honest here. Because this money is not coming from you. I know it's not coming from you. And again, this is not hate for Francis Ngannou. Listen, Francis Ngannou is an amazing fighter. Amazing, incredible. Top 3 heavyweights on the planet. I would still say so. But his hype has lowered significantly. Like, he's so far removed from his dominant performance against Stipe Miocic. And he's coming off 2 back-to-back losses in boxing. The last thing anyone remembers from Francis Ngannou is Anthony Joshua KOing him. If he took this fight after the Tyson Fury fight, and you built him up like he is the baddest man on the planet. He just beat Tyson Fury, the baddest man in boxing. And now he's coming to PFL. But instead, what we're getting is Francis Ngannou getting stiffed out cold by Anthony Joshua, and now coming into the PFL to yuck it up a little bit with Renan Ferreira. Not yuck it up, but you know what I mean. Where does Renan Ferreira rank in the world right now as heavyweight? Is he top 5? Jones, Cyril Gane, Tom Aspinall, Curtis Blades. Maybe some people still think it's Stipe Miocic. Francis Ngannou himself. No? Do I think Renan Ferreira could potentially beat Rosenstruik? Or Tai Tuivasa? Yeah, I think so. But what's that? Francis Ngannou versus Rosenstruik. Remember that when that happened? Imagine that was a main event. Imagine you put all this money into a main event and it lasts 60 seconds, which maybe you get some fans out of because it's like a clippable moment. But what if it doesn't? What if this ends up being like Lewis versus Ngannou? What if this is a boring fight, no one cares, and the star power of Ngannou drops even further, and oh, guess what? On top of that, Francis Ngannou loses embarrassingly. What then? You're not going to make him take a pay cut, are you? I mean, you could try, but I don't think Francis Ngannou's going to do it. He'd just go back to boxing and fight Dillian White or something. Or maybe Deontay Wilder, because he's coming off losses. He could probably use a free win. What's happening? And you know what? I feel like I'm going to get hate for this. But I'm just being honest. Like I was being honest in the Max Holloway video. I'm just like analyzing what I'm seeing. And I'm showing you stuff. How much they're making. I saw somewhere it was reported Chris Cyborg was making almost $1 million. Her opponent, I've forgotten her name now. But I know she's a badass. She beat Kayla Harrison on her 3rd try, I believe. But still, she beat Kayla Harrison recently. She's making almost $1 million as well, I've read somewhere. So the way that the PFL is putting money into this sphere-like event is by just paying their fighters a lot of money. No one's gonna watch. Let's be honest here. If you're watching, you're tuning in right before the pay-per-view main event. Or maybe the co-main event. Maybe you know who Chris Cyborg is. Which you probably do, but you don't really care about her. Not you, but the world. And then there's this. The revenue's apparently up by 75%. They're apparently expected to generate over $100 million in revenue through sponsorships and some investment funds of Saudi Arabia, as it says so there. So the PFL's just going to become a Saudi promotion? Maybe we can get Tyson Fury in an MMA fight. Put some MMA gloves on him. Let's see if that sells. Let's have a second go around to the Anthony Joshua fight, because his career's basically done now, right? Like, he's gotten embarrassed. Maybe they can have an MMA fight. Maybe Jake Paul can show up, and he can have a... And you know what? Jake Paul probably is a bigger star than Francis Ngannou. Him versus Nate Diaz did 400,000 pay-per-view buys for a boxing fight. I can't remember what the price was. I don't think it was like $60, but that did 400,000 buys. Is that what the PFL is now? Just a front for oil money? Just a front to like have people like just hide their money you know what I mean? Like under the table black market dealings going on. I'm not sure what's happening. Apparently these super fights are something they want to do over and over and over again. Bizarre. Just to say, bizarre that the PFL have sunk this much money in. I don't think this pay-per-view does more than 60,000 buys. I'm being honest. I think 50,000 buys. Maybe 50,000, I think. Unless PFL just goes out there and lies about how many pay-per-view buys they did, which they probably will, let's be honest here. They're going to lie about this like a motherfucker. We're not going to see any like official numbers come out. We'll just see PFL does better than expected, while everyone who actually bothers to watch it is illegally streaming it. And I'm just being honest right now, because I'm not going to pay for just one fight. I know the card is really good and apparently the real MMA fans would want to watch, but the UFC's on that day. I'm not going to pay for a pay-per-view event. I'll be streaming the UFC. I'm not going to pay for a pay-per-view event just to watch one fight on replay. You know what I mean? Especially when the card starts at 7 a.m. where I live. 7 a.m. Early. I'll be 7 a.m. up streaming, watching the UFC, having a good time. I'm going to end on this. I'm going to end on one last thing, and that's just the final thing to shit on PFL for. Oh, by the way, the $100 million. So they've decided to make the most money they've ever made and then immediately just sink it down the drain. Immediately they just thought to themselves, we made $100 million. Let's just throw it around over here and here. Let's spend 20 plus million of that $100 million that we're making in revenue. In revenue? Shut up. Okay, whoever this person, shut up. Okay? $20 million for this event. It's just crazy to me. The delusion and like, you don't think if Francis Ngannou was this massive draw, the UFC would have just kept him around? Think about it, right? The UFC promotes better. Any fight in the UFC for Francis Ngannou is bigger just because of the promotion. There's bigger names in the UFC. Don't you think if Francis Ngannou was this big name, they would have just kept him around? Paid him the $10 million if that's all it took? I'm not saying that's all it took, but $10 million? A big chunk of change if they were expecting to make like this huge strives. Seems fishy to me. And then this is the final thing I want to close out on. This is Dana White shitting on the PFL. And I like it. This is after the PFL absorbed Bellator. And Dana White very articulately points out his opinions on the matter. Oh, crap.
Bellator, PFL is now saying that, they're the co-leader. They believe that the roster is comparable to the UFC's. So what do you make of the whole...
I don't know. What do you think about that?
Asking you.
No comment? You have no comment? You want me to comment? It's fucking hilarious. But
it is fucking hilarious. Because even though the PFL roster got better, it's just names at the end of the day. You still got to pay them. That's money coming out of your generated revenue of $100 million, which I don't understand. They sell like 2,000 to 3,000 tickets and do like 2 pay-per-view events a year. We don't know where this money's coming from. Obviously the Saudi money, but Jesus Christ. Anyway, it is hilarious. It is hilarious that the PFL has done this.
But yeah, good for them. I wish them all the luck in the world.
Very cool. And Oscar mentioned
I've covered this before. You must not have heard it. One shitty organization that sells no tickets and nobody watches buys another shitty organization that sells no tickets and nobody watches. Sounds like a fucking winner to me, boy. Right? Woo!
And that's just when I ended on. One shitty organization that sells no tickets and another shitty organization that sells no tickets. I like Bellator and I like the PFL and I like that they're an alternative to the UFC, but can they be that? Just an alternative for now, and maybe in the future, if things come up and there's some opportunities. Because right now, the way I'm seeing it, $10 million for Francis Ngannou for a Renan Ferreira fight, I feel like they kind of just blew their load. Like at the time, they thought Francis Ngannou was this big name. Even though he wasn't even all that back then. Like $200,000 with Cyril Gane on a UFC pay-per-view, keep in mind. And now his name's just diminished more. He's further away from people's memory from his last fight. He's lost a few times in boxing. They're overpaying the entire roster, so maybe you tune in by any chance, bother watching the entire card, and you see some names you like, and then you go off from there. And I feel bad. I feel bad for shitting on them so hard. But what do you expect? Like, if I read some numbers and it said Francis Ngannou's fighting for $100,000, I'd be like, the PFL's doing an amazing job. They've fleeced Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou has been stifled. He's been locked under contract. He can't box unless he fights in the PFL. The PFL is going to make so much money in revenue. They'll flip profits. All of these things, but instead they paid him $10 million for an event that I don't think will generate $10 million, unless the Saudi princes just give him more money after they burn through their stash at the Battle of the Giants. Ooh, you know. All right, that's it. Like, share, and subscribe. I feel like if this video gets any views, it'll get hate comments, obviously. But just listen to what I'm saying. Look at the proof I'm giving you. Please explain to me in the comment section how the PFL is about to make an absurd amount of money. I'm on 23 or 24 subscribers right now. Subscribe. Let's get me to 30. That's the new goal. 30, right? Let's get me to 30. I'll see you guys later.